very warm welcome to the 30th episode of the podcast of the World Wind Energy Association, The World of Wind Power. My name is Stefan Gsänger, and I am very happy to be the host of today's episode. And the topic today is related, well, many countries start now holiday season, so it makes a lot of sense to talk now about transportation of people, but as well as of cargo. That's very important. That's also one area where there is maybe less progress for sure than in the on-land electrification sector. So the topic today is shipping, and in particular, propulsion of ships through wind power. And it's my great pleasure to have the most knowledgeable guest I could have for this, Gavin Allwright from the International Windship Association. Gavin, my pleasure to have you here.
No, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Stefan.
Yeah, Gavin, let me start by saying that we've been working together for a couple of years already because our associations, we have a kind of collaboration. We sometimes meet, exchange where we are. I find this really very exciting to see, to learn from you. Attended also your conferences, but maybe you want to explain a little bit. I think you are the better person than me to explain maybe first how did you come to this topic, wind propulsion, and what's your association doing?
Yeah, well, I'm the Secretary General of the association, and the association's about, I think, 200 active members, associates, and registered supporters, and maybe I'll talk about that a little bit later. But how I got into this, back in, I think, 2004, I was doing a lot of work around sustainability, which I won't go into a lot of details, but I was doing my master's degree as well. And I was interested in finding a project that really dealt with both renewable energy, but also a pinch point in development, in sustainable development. And the more I looked into it, the more I saw that shipping in least developed countries was a real pinch point, very, very costly, really challenging for local people to have the agency around solutions. And I joined a project called the Green Heart Project and worked with that, which was developing sail and solar powered trading vessels and passenger vessels for the least for small island developing states, least developed countries. And through that, kind of discovered that this was a very small niche, that there were some projects trying to bring wind propulsion, which has a 5,000 year pedigree, if you like. We've been using it for a very long time. Then we've had this kind of 120 years blip of fossil fuel, and now there was an opportunity, maybe an opportunity to bring direct wind propulsion back into shipping. So we brought together the projects and said, well, look, guys, there is no market at the moment. We need to collaborate to build a market, and then you can compete for that. And that was really the birth of IWSA back in 2013. And since then, we've been building up, adding members, and now we have some of the biggest ship owners in the world, MOL, companies like Cargill, which is a major charterer, Mitsubishi, numerous others, along with technology providers, R&D centers, basically the whole holistic ecosystem of wind propulsion, including shipbuilders as well. And we advocate very much, we do a lot of work very similar to WWEA, where we advocate for policy, we write reports, we establish events for networking for the technology providers, and so on. So we're very much a trade association.
It's really very interesting how you came into this and also describing it that you initially understood this is maybe a niche. You used that word. Um, Maybe my very first impression was like that as well. I mean, I more and more understand how important at first shipping is and also the technology that you are representing and you're working for. I think that many people probably do underestimate the importance of ships nowadays because you rightly said that over hundreds of years, of course, ships were, I mean, we are both Europeans, used by Europeans, of course, a lot, but other cultures as well. For long distance traveling, that was the first way. But I mean, when I look out of the window, I see the River Rhine. I see some small ships there as well, transporting cargo and some transporting people as well. But what is the importance? I'm sure you know that as well, of shipping nowadays in the modern industry today.
Yeah, well, I can maybe give you some just some statistics or some figures to kind of bring this into perspective. So we're talking about, depending on how you calculate it, between 60,000 and 100,000 large cargo vessels and large passenger vessels
Mhm.
um, going around the world, moving about 80 to 90% of all trade is moved on ships. That's not all
Wow.
international trade. That's not all trade, but that's international trade. And it emits between 2 and 3% of the world's carbon emissions come from shipping. So about the same as Germany, if it was a country. But it burns a very dirty fuel called bunker fuel or heavy fuel oil, which has a lot of other emissions within it. So nitrous oxides, sulfur oxides, particulate matter. So this is really dirty fuel. This is the stuff that's left once you take out your petrol, your kerosene, everything else, and there's a kind of yellowy sludge at the bottom of an oil barrel. That's what we burn in the big ships. Um, and so wind propulsion at the moment is we have about over 100 ships, large ships, that are in operation. And some of these are the largest ships in the world. So we're talking 300 to 400 meters long,
Mhm.
pretty much floating cities with different types of wind propulsion technology bolted onto the deck, moving the ships, maybe 10% of that energy is being moved by the ship. But remembering that that ship is burning probably 100 tons, yeah, 50 to 100 tons of that very dirty fuel every day. When you're reducing 10 tons, 12 tons, 15 tons, that's very substantial. So, and then as smaller ships, we have ships that are maybe 50% plus. So we call them primary wind vessels. And the largest one of those has just been launched, a 220-meter cruise ship, which uses 60 to 70% wind in
Mhm.
its operations. So as wind comes into the sector, it's becoming more and more important. But I would like to bring out also that that's one way. We're the direct wind propulsion guys, but we also have wind being used to obviously generate electricity, and there's electrification going on of shipping, and also that electrification is also being used for the production of alternative fuels as well, so e-fuels, which are also is another how can I say, another strand or another pathway as well. So wind is very much connected to the ships, both directly and indirectly.
Well, let's just go back to what you just said. I think this is really amazing. We should repeat that 80 to 90% of international trade is done by ships.
Yes,
That
absolutely.
is an impressive number, really. So it really highlights that I think the global economy would not exist without ships.
Absolutely. Well, if we think one container ship, the largest one's at around 20,000 TEU. So a TEU is a 20-foot container. So if
Mm.
you see a big truck, that's a 2 TEU container. So those would be carrying 10,000 of those.
Actually, I
Um,
saw the largest one after your conference in Rotterdam. I
okay,
visited
great.
the harbor and there was one of these Maersk 20,000 containers vessels. Very impressive, really very impressive. And I was just thinking of Oh, you need 20,000 trucks to transport this from this harbor to wherever then the cargo goes to.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And if you think there's probably about 400 of those plying, the routes, and then you've got oil tankers, you've got bulk carriers, so grain, coal, wood, um, and then you've got smaller ro-ro, roll-on, roll-off vessels, roll on, roll off passenger vessels, which maybe your listeners are more familiar with. And then we have smaller general cargo and specialist vessels all over the place. So yeah, it's basically modern life as we know it doesn't exist without shipping.
Mm. Now, one question I'm sure our audience is interested in, and I've dealt with this also. I asked you once even, how many of these ships are actually transporting fossil fuels like coal? And I think especially, I think at the moment we hear a lot about the Strait of Hormuz, and that there is a
Hmm.
problem because the container, the vessels transporting oil from the Gulf countries to the world is not working. We hear a lot about LNG now, which is transported by vessels
Sure.
after, especially, Germany doesn't get any more gas from Russia through pipelines, but there's also LNG tankers. Can you at least guess what the share of, you said 60 to 100,000 vessels are
Yeah.
of this large scale? How many of them are using fossil fuels, which are still, of course, very important for the global economy as well?
Yeah. So the actual use of fossil fuel, 90, I'm going to say 98% of those vessels use fossil fuels at the moment.
Yeah, yeah, that's.
That's for their propulsion.
Mm,
But the carrying of fossil products, if you like, so
mm,
everything from LNG to coal to oil. I've seen estimates, and I'm not 100%. I can't verify this number, but I've seen estimates between 30 and 40% of shipping is involved with the movement of either fossil fuel or fossil derived products. So I'm not derived products, fossil products. So, for example, plastics or chemical,
mm,
petrochemicals. So, if fossil fuel would, if we moved away, transitioned away from fossil fuel, some estimates say we could get rid of maybe a third of the shipping that we have. The only problem is that we may be transporting other materials which aren't derived from fossil fuels. So I'm not sure if the shipping would contract that much, but it's quite possible it would.
mm. Yeah, I mean, anyway, it's not necessary to fuel a car in, let's say, Central Europe to transport the fuel on a vessel from, let's say, somewhere in the Gulf region. So that may not be necessary anymore. It gives maybe then also more flexibility to other shippers. But now let's talk about the solutions maybe more in detail. So I think it's very obvious with industrialization. Before that, ships were already very important. And then with industrialization, let's like land-bound transportation as well. The number or the amount of transportation is just kind of exploding. Huh? We have now. It also started with coal, like railways, for example. Huh? I think in the country where you're based, it's the motherland of railway steams
Indeed,
using
indeed.
steam. We now know electricity works very well there. With the vessels, obviously, it's more or less using a similar system like that was invented in the 19th century. But you have already mentioned that one way is, yeah, to some degree going back using wind directly. But what options? You already touched some of these solutions. Maybe you can explain what you or what is maybe discussed at the moment, how to
Sure.
replace fuels that work like fossil fuels but are generated from renewable electricity, for example, onshore wind or offshore wind,
Hmm.
technology I mainly work for, or what other options do we have?
Yeah, well, I'll give you a little bit of perspective that we take first, and then plug in the alternatives into that. So
Mm,
one of the big problems, and I think we have this on land-based uses as well, is there's this perspective that we need to replace. the same amount of work done with the same amount of equivalent fuel. And really, in shipping, there's a huge amount that can be done around shipping efficiency on board the vessels, making these better, cleaner vessels, with coatings, with energy management on the vessels. And only about a third of ships have actually implemented any kind of energy efficiency measures. So there's a big area for that. We could probably get a reduction around 20%. Also training our crew better, the operators better. Then there's also voyage optimization, and that links to wind propulsion as well. So if we use the asset or we apply the asset better, obviously we reduce the fuel usage because we're running the ship not into a storm, but around a storm, for example,
Mm-hmm.
or we're weather routing for wind. And up till now, shipping doesn't have like aircraft do. You have air traffic controllers who can manage all this. Ships don't have that.
Oh,
They go
interesting.
wherever they want under certain rules, but they go wherever they want at any time they want. It's up to them. So it's more like a truck used as a truck rather than a coordinated transport system. So there's a massive area of improvement that can be made there. And then we plug in wind. And each of those segments could deliver 20% plus
Mm-hmm.
of the energy requirement, either reducing it or, in the wind propulsion perspective, providing it. That reduces the pool of energy that's required down to 40% or even less.
Mm-hmm.
And within that pool, then we have other things. So the wind propulsion technologies, of course, I could spend all day talking about the different technologies. There's actually a group of 7 different ones, from massive rotors that spin and catch the wind, to wing sails, to soft sails, to
Yeah,
suction
maybe you
sails, even
can just
kites.
elaborate a bit on this further. I think this is
Yep.
people are not really aware of that. You said
Yeah,
there's
yeah, yeah.
7 different technologies for wind propulsion.
7 different groups of technology, and
Groups
within
of.
those groups,
Okay.
there's variations. So, okay, I'll quickly go through those then. So, a wing sail, a lot of people or a soft sail is probably the one that most people think of,
That's
which is
how we
a
used
billowing
over
sail.
centuries.
Yeah, yeah. But there's a really, I'll just talk about a very fundamental misunderstanding. Most people see the wind blow, the sail billows, and it pushes the ship.
Mhm.
That's actually incorrect. It doesn't push the ship. Just as a rotor blade doesn't is not pushed around, it's kind of sucked around. The pressure differentials. On one side of the sail, the wind has a long way to go around, and on the other side, it has a shorter way. So um, that's the same with all different types of wind technology. We're actually creating pressure differentials on each side of the system, and that's why they're different curvatures. Um, and again, I can't go through all the science there, but what I can say, it's a little bit like a aircraft wing.
Mhm.
So you have a concave and a convex side, and the wind goes different speeds over that. And then you've got obviously the jet thrust. So a very small wing can lift hundreds of tons into the air. That's created by the pressure differential. If you then move that wing from the horizontal to the vertical, that's a wing sail. That's a rigid
Mhm.
wing sail. And it works exactly the same way. And we can actually go, if the wind blows at 10 knots, if you have a very light vessel, you could maybe be operating at 30 or 40 knots.
Wow.
So it's 3 or 4 times the speed of the wind can be multiplied up.
Oh.
So if you ever watch the guys that sail in the America's Cup and the foiling, so they're out of the water, almost taking off, those guys are going 3 or 4 times the speed of the wind. So that's, to me, I'm a non-scientist. That's magic,
That is.
which
That
is
is.
incredible.
Mhm.
But then we have, so the wing sails, I think the biggest ones are 68 meters high at the moment.
Mhm.
Then we have a rotor sail, which is a spinning cylinder. developed by Anton Flettner, who obviously a German national, developed early helicopters. But he developed this system in the 1920s, and the wind hits the rotating cylinder, and again, accelerates on one side, slows on the other side, and creates thrust. A little bit like a curve ball in baseball,
Mhm.
or a swerve ball in football, I should say, as we're around the World Cup at the moment. And then we have kites, which again operate 200 meters above the ship. First ones were developed in Germany as well. So Germany's been a real at the forefront of some of these technologies.
Mhm.
And then we have a thing called a suction sail or a suction wing, where it's a stubby cylinder, looks a bit like a wing sail, looks a bit like a rotor, but it doesn't move. And inside there's a fan with vents, and it sucks the wind boundary layer around it and generates more thrust. And that was developed in the 1980s by Jacques Cousteau and his team. So any people of my age or older maybe remember Jacques Cousteau as an underwater diver and a pioneer for the oceans. He developed that and operated that on some of his research vessels. So all of that basket of technologies, and then there's some turbine development as well, and also hull creating the hull of the ship into a wing sail, which is quite revolutionary. And there are some research and development projects. There's no actual vessels in operation yet, but those are the seven groups. Um, and effectively, we could probably get 20-30% of the power across the entire fleet could be
Mhm.
delivered by wind. Some ships can go 100% on the wind, others will be 10%, but
What?
averaged out.
Why would there be this difference? I mean, we know that we talked about it a couple of times. All those mainly European nations brought all the wealth from other countries to Europe. They just used these sailing boats that I think everybody knows from the Pirates of the Caribbean or whatever. Why would you say that there is this 20 to 30% in average that the direct with propulsion could contribute? Is it because they want
Yeah,
to be faster and then sometimes they cannot just rely on wind?
yeah. So maybe I have to put my eye patch on for this, for my Jack Sparrow impression. But yeah, I mean, if okay, so I'm giving the how can I say the uh existing fleet as it is today,
Mm,
what can be done with new builds coming through. So we have about a replenishment rate, new builds coming through of about 2,000 ships a year. Now, if we made a decision to make all of those ships optimized for wind, and we decide to run our shipping fleet again with maximum wind, then we could be talking much, much higher numbers.
mhm,
But that would involve some very, very large wind systems being developed. It would also involve quite a dramatic change in how we operate shipping, because a 400-meter oil tanker that weighs 200,000, 300,000 tons to be moved only by wind at a commercially viable speed and a safe speed all of the time, that's a big challenge for wind. You would need a dramatic change in the design, etc., etc. So taking what's likely to happen within shipping, so retrofitting the old ships,
mhm. That
those can
means
only be retrofitted up to maybe 10 or 20%
you would
because
add, that means what you would do is you would add one of these technologies to an existing vessel ship.
exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. So we're putting say a wing sail onto a ship which is designed to be a motor ship. So
Mm,
it's not as sleek lined. Uh, a lot of the systems are not there to optimize wind, to really, really engage with the wind. So you're basically tweaking the existing ships. Um, but then with new builds, you're integrating the wind into the ship design itself,
mm,
and you've maybe got hundreds of moving parts within the engine systems, those have to be integrated because the wind, I hate to break it to you, Stefan, but sometimes the wind doesn't blow, or sometimes the wind blows too much, or sometimes it's blowing a lot and then a little in a very short period of time.
I think
I
we
don't know
both
if
have
you're
that.
aware of
We both have the challenge. Huh?
that. So, so when you have that, you have to keep the ship operating, say, at 10 knots or 12 knots or 15 knots. Um, if your wind is volatile, it's moving backwards and forwards, your engine has to be able to deal with those changes. And it cuts in when there's not enough wind, and then it will reduce when there's a lot of wind. So that's quite a sophisticated system. And if you're doing it a new build, it's easier, much, much easier. If you're doing it as a retrofit, and you're making a hybrid, then it's a little bit more challenging. So we tend to be conservative and say, yeah, 20% plus of the power could be delivered from wind across the fleet, as it looks like that fleet will be over the next couple of decades. If we made a really ambitious change, then we could really push that, maybe push it up to 30% or 40%.
Okay.
Um, but yes, and some of our members, they would love to go back to smaller vessels, operating primarily on wind all over the world. Fantastic. If we could get that paradigm change, brilliant. Um, but at the moment, that's the realistic number that we're talking about. But then if we're linking those with the energy efficiency and with the voyage optimization, if we're getting 60%, that leaves a much easier nut to crack from the alternative fuels. And that's where the wind comes in
Mhm.
indirectly. So it could be electrification. And there's a lot of talk around e-fuels. So things like methanol, e-methane, e-LNG, which has, obviously all of these have challenges because they may have low carbon, but they may have other emissions impact. And even ammonia is quite a big getting quite a lot of attention as a possible fuel as well, which is highly toxic, but also carries a huge amount of carbon within it. So it's a very
Mhm.
efficient carbon carrying chemical. And indeed, it's one of the most transported chemicals around the world
Mhm.
today, mainly for fertilizers and also for some other industrial uses as well.
So when I listen to you, I understand that wind you expect will not take over propulsion completely, but we will see something like maybe in some cases, because even some people they have sailing boats which do not have any additional propulsion, but that's more as a hobby. But you see, I understand you for a reason. Let me call it pragmatism. You would have a kind of hybrid system in the future.
Yeah, yeah, and all ships, even under regulation, every
Mm.
ship must have the ability to maintain a safe speed. So they have a minimum power requirement. So wind, we can reduce that minimum power requirement, but every ship has to be able to operate from A to B on an engine. Whether you use that engine or not is up to you. But
Mm.
yes, I mean, on a Monday morning, I get up full of optimism. I say, yeah, we can go much higher. We can change the paradigm. By Friday afternoon, maybe I'm being a little bit more pragmatic. But yeah, maybe my optimism fluctuates like the wind.
But anyway, now I think we understand what the direction should be and could be, and maybe it's where wind power, wind generation through wind turbines stood. Yeah, I think when we started somewhere in the 90s, huh? So when
Yes,
we were
yes.
below 1%, and you said 100 ships now have such kind of propulsion, and the numbers you said, so it's maybe it's below 1% yet of the ships. But
Yeah,
it's
below
impressive
1%.
compared to when I remember when I attended your conference, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. It was much less than that.
Yeah, we had a handful, and actually, if I can give you just an idea of the sort of trajectory of development, We're basically doubling every year. So I think when
Wow.
we met, maybe we were at about 10 or a dozen ships. Pretty much every year, we've seen a doubling, and we're at about 106 now. But we exclude a few other types of vessel just because we can't verify that they're fully operational using the wind. And we also have an area called wind ready vessels, which are prepared for wind, but they're not buying the system just yet.
Hmm.
And there's another dozen of those. So we could be talking about 130, 140 ships if we added in all of these others. And then you've got the smaller vessels, which is another hundreds of small vessels in small developing states, dozens in Europe that are transporting smaller amounts of cargo, but they're under a threshold, which I won't go into right now, but they're small vessels. So yes, it's grown quite substantially, and we've got a pipeline of orders that will double it again in the next 12 months. So we're still on that trajectory. But if I can just mention, you're absolutely right about the wind turbine industry kind of bubbled along, doubling, installations, and then reach an inflection point where the costs are really starting to drop on the production. Fuel prices are spiking. The technology is understood. Perceptions have changed. In shipping now, where 3 or 4 years ago everybody thought I was Jack Sparrow, now they think I'm more like Stefan Zanger, of somebody talking about a mature technology that needs to be scaled further. And that is a major change. And we're just about seeing that now. One other driver for that is the data. What we have a problem in shipping because fuel data is also the competitive advantage of the ship owner. So he doesn't want to release data about how much fuel they're using because their competitor will immediately jump on that because
Okay.
that's the place they can make money. So
That's interesting.
what we need is enough ships in operation where we can anonymize the data for the technologies. And at the moment, we have 100 ships in operation, but we only have 50 ships with 1 year or more data. So by this time next year, we'll have 100 ships in various different segments using different technologies, and we can start to aggregate and anonymize that data. Once that happens, that goes into the wider market, and we start to really see the perspective or the perception accelerating for the uptake.
That is sounds really very exciting, and as you really that
Mm.
reminds me of the, as you said, the development of the what we have today as modern wind turbines. Now, before we go to that more policy side, let me ask you for the second part of your essay. You said there will probably be many hybrid systems. So we heard a lot about the technology on the direct wind propulsion side. The other side is, of course, a lot hydrogen based, and I'm a little bit. Not frustrated is the wrong word, but there's a lot of talk about hydrogen, but it's not so much really showing up. I mean, we do not really see a lot happening. I was in China recently, and then I also visited the headquarter of Goldwind, which is the world's largest wind turbine manufacturer. I was just told there that they just made an agreement with Mars, Hapag-Lloyd, two of the major vessel operators, I understand. You know them better than I do, of course.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that
Yep.
they will produce, I think they said 50,000 tons of methane, which they will, I mean, the two shipping companies will buy from them.
Mm.
That is the largest I've heard so far. But how far is that side? It's not your main, I think, I understand, area,
Yeah.
but
No.
what is, how do you perceive this? This was just like an anecdote that I have now learned. Still, I found impressive, but I also, if I hear 50,000 tons, sounds a lot, but I guess it's not so big when you compare that with the overall consumption.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, this is yeah. We or I exist in that ecosystem too of alternative fuels, alternative energy. So, yeah. Um, okay, I'll come back to hydrogen in a moment, but the methane is Okay, the alternative fuel that we have had in shipping is still a fossil fuel, but LNG, so from the tankers, but also from numerous ships, I think up to maybe 1,000 vessels now, have been converted or built as LNG powered vessels. So about 200 or 300 tankers use the boil off of the LNG, goes back into the engine and powers the ship. And then we have about maybe 700, 800 ships with probably about similar number on order of LNG tanks and burning that, so basically burning methane. Now, that has taken 25 years to get to 1,000 ships. So the first ones were back in the early noughties. So it's taken a long time to roll that out with large financial backing from industry, from the banks, and political backing. What's concerning is that's only a few percent of the fleet. Um, but it is a pathway that you have all of the infrastructure in place, so you can pump e-methane straight into that existing infrastructure and then burn e-methane in your vessels.
Mhm.
I'm not going. We stay fuel neutral. We say, look, as long as you're using wind to propel your ship, whatever else you use in your engines, that's your choice. Okay. But that e-methane, that's the reason why you can take an order straight away, pump it straight into the LNG pathway, in infrastructure pathway, and it's almost a drop-in fuel. Biofuels, other biofuels are also drop-in fuels. So we've got biodiesel that's being dropped in, bio HFO as well. So those, and we have biomethane as well, which would drop into that same infrastructure.
Mhm.
Anything else requires the ship to be a dual fuel vessel. Some of those LNGs are dual fuel as well, which means they can burn LNG and the existing fossil fuel. So an oil base, they have different tanks. A lot of ships, or some ships, are being built as dual fuel methanol and fuel oil. Some others, we're just seeing ammonia coming in for big ships. There's one or two that have been built and a few ammonia-ready ships. And then direct hydrogen is a bit challenging. We have quite a few small vessels, probably low hundreds of small vessels, ferries. Maybe that's actually too optimistic. Maybe it's dozens of these vessels. But you need the tanks and you need the production on land, you need the supply, you have to be very careful with leakage as well. So that supply is not available internationally at all. So it's a challenge to deliver any of these fuels where there is no infrastructure or bunkering available in ports. And that's what's really holding it back. Electrification, we can do quite easily. And there's also the opportunity cost of making those fuels. And I'll just maybe make this as my last point on this point. One of the issues is if you're generating your members are generating these electrons, green electrons, is it better to use those because we're still limited to take a coal-fired power station offline on land or electrify another 100,000 cars directly, or convert that into an e-fuel, which you lose maybe 80 to 90% of those green electrons are lost
Yeah.
by the time it comes out of the propeller. So we have a lot of transmission loss, conversion loss. Then it's burned in a combustion engine, or your fuel cell is more efficient. You may be losing half, and then you lose another 20% through your propeller and your drive shaft. So it's a lot of renewable energy will be required to produce 1 unit of power out of the end of the ship. So
That's
there are
why
obviously,
I think in the car sector, it's very obvious that the battery electric vehicles are the winners because there you can easily charge at any time. But I understand for the shipping industry, maybe let's speak briefly about the electrification there as well. I mean, usually we now talked about those vessels which travel over thousands of kilometers, where they may not be able to charge because there is no plug on somewhere on the ocean. But we had a brief talk before this that there is now also some even bigger like cruise vessels that are purely electric. As I mentioned, I'm living at the Rhine River, and more of these ferry boats, which just, of course, they takes them 500 meters to cross the Rhine. They are purely electric. Where would you see that? Yeah, this is until when a purely electric ship could go. Maybe this is where, we direct wind propulsion can help to extend that.
Sure.
And from when on do you think, no, that electrification is not at the moment the option?
Yeah, so in the current situation, short sea shipping is what we call it, is shipping that's you know uh, a few days, etc. That has great opportunities for electrification. Anything under a day, basically the technology is there straight away to propel that ship. Pretty much any of the big cross-channel ferries, for example, could be electrified. They aren't at the moment. Um, but we also have hybrid electric, so they'll be running on diesel with large battery banks for maneuvering, which uses up a lot of the fuel, and also can supplement the propulsion. Anything a river barge, absolutely. The actually the power that you can get from battery banks, you can get a lot of power from those. You can draw down very quickly. So it's actually a lot of tug operators love the electric tugs that they're starting to come in because they can generate huge amounts of power at a very short period of time. So so in that sense, anything that's under a day of journey, that there is no obstacle to electrifying it at
Mm.
all anymore. Well, I say that there's a cost. You've got to convert your ship, and unfortunately, on barges, many of those barges are very old, and to retrofit them is quite expensive. Um, but absolutely doable. And there's another thing as well is modularization. So once you have an electric drivetrain, you can effectively put a container on the deck with all your battery banks there, or you could put a fuel cell in there if hydrogen does become available and once. So you can lift those battery banks on and off. So you don't even need to charge them. You could come to a charging station, lift off the depleted batteries, pick up one that's fully charged, and you're off again within a few minutes, compared with having to sit around and charge the vessel.
Mm.
So that modularization is really important as well. Now, for larger vessels, anything that's going, for a few days out into the ocean, electrification is not an option at the moment because you've got to carry so much power with you. Um, Again, modularization, maybe that's helpful, but you've still got to carry a lot of these modules with you. But there is an interesting paradigm here for wind propulsion because quite often wind blows too much. So once you get to your hull speed, you can't go any faster. So then you start having to spill the wind from your sails. Well, if you had a drag generator or if you counter rotate your propellers, you're turning the engine into a generator if it's electric, right? Or you can run an electric shaft generator and feather the propeller. So it's still going around, but there's no power coming from it. That would generate electricity, which goes into your battery banks. But also, we have some projects that are looking to convert that electricity into fuel, which is then stored on board and burned when you don't have any wind. That starts to move you. The potential there is to move you towards a far higher level of wind propulsion. So that new paradigm. So that is very doable. If you put some solar panels or solar coatings on the vessel, that can also generate electricity as well. Possibly some small wind turbines on the deck. which again feed into that. So there is potential to have a far larger energy generation on board the ship. For medium size and small ships, that's absolutely doable. For the real big beasts, I think we're quite a long way away from that, but it's definitely possible.
This is very exciting, and I really love listening to you and hear about all the options. So, what we do understand that now this kind of implementation time has started. So you said doubling every year. That's really impressive. Now with around 100 and maybe 200 in a year. Probably there will be a lot of learning effects also in the very near future.
Mm,
Now, time is running as usual, but this is very exciting, and we do not have a lot of time now left. But I still would like to ask you what's keeping it back, and what kind of what do we need to ask from the governments? I do understand that this is much more very different from like wind turbines because that's mainly a national, sometimes even local decision. But these vessels in particular that travel from, let's say, Europe to East Asia, there is international regulations maybe even affected,
yes,
maybe the national laws of the harbor cities or that place. What are the main first? Yeah, let's talk about the barriers. What are the
sure.
problems here that you are working on? And that's what you said initially. You work on improving those regulations.
Yeah, sure. Well, the governing body for shipping is the International Maritime Organization, which is based. It's a UN agency, and it covers all maritime, so all shipping. It's only one of two industry sector UN organizations. The other one is for aviation, in transport. Yeah. Everything else is under national purview or regional purview, like the EU. So, but for shipping, the International Maritime Organization. Now, obviously, there's safety issues, there are training issues, there are other policy issues. Most of those are manageable. So there's no policy hurdle that is a direct stop or a real challenge for wind propulsion. And indeed, we have a big decarbonisation called the Net Zero Framework, which was voted on 2023. So industry-wide pathway to net zero by 2050, or thereabouts, for the entire global shipping industry. The problem is how do we get there? And
It's
we're,
not
we're
so
having a
much
big
time
debate.
left.
Yeah, no, indeed. And we have a big debate around basically a carbon tax for all of shipping, which was supposed to be voted through in October last year. It was adjourned until November, December this year. So if that's passed, then we will be the first sector in the world to have a global carbon tax on, which is quite something. It's not as good as we would like to see it, but and there's a lot of details there. So one of the big challenges was to get wind propulsion into that framework, and there's a perception issue amongst policymakers that wind propulsion is an energy efficiency measure because it means less fuel. So we've been arguing for numerous years saying that you can't move a ship with an energy efficiency measure, and you can move a
True.
ship with wind. Wind is an energy provider, and it's a direct provider that you don't need to mine, refine, transport, bunker, or store on board. Directly delivered to the ship, zero emissions, and the big kicker, zero cost. The energy is zero cost. The technology to harvest it, just as a turbine is you have to pay for, but it's zero cost to the ship for the lifetime of that vessel. So um, now we come to probably the big problem, or one of the big problems, and I could go through many different issues, but there's a big problem in shipping that maybe the solar panel industry would understand this quite clearly. It's called a split incentive. And what that is a ship is chartered to a cargo owner, if you like. So it's leased or rented by the cargo owner. And the cargo owner pays for the fuel, but the ship owner pays for the technology, any improvement to the ship. So it's very much like if you're in a rented house or rented apartment and you would like solar panels on the roof, because that's going to reduce your costs and it's green, it's fantastic. But the you don't pay for the solar panels. The landlord has to pay for the solar panels, but he gets no benefit. You get lower bills, he gets no benefit. So this is exactly the same in shipping. Is the ship owner, why should I put wind propulsion on, which might cost millions? I don't get any benefit because I'm not paying for the fuel. So, and the charterer won't pay for more leasing cost for the ship just because it's got wind propulsion. So this is a market failure that we're trying to broach, trying
Mm.
to change. Also, we have a rule which comes from the wind propulsion time of old, which was you have to go from A to B as quickly as possible under power. That's in your contract. It's called a time charter. You have to fulfill your charter in that
Mhm.
time. And that comes from the wind propulsion period when, ships didn't have engines, so maybe they don't turn up for a month because there was no wind. Um, that's a problem because if you've got wind on your ship, you want to move your ship to where the wind is and then go on the wind to save loads of fuel. But then you may be a day late or 2 days late. So the chartering system, the contractual system, doesn't allow for that deviation very easily. So these are the areas that we're trying to change.
Mhm.
And the last one is the return on investment. So if we have low fuel prices, and some of this stuff is very cheap, 400 $400, $500 per ton of the fuel. It's too cheap. So the wind system maybe 5 years return on investment, 7 years return on investment. That doesn't sound too much to land-based infrastructure projects. In shipping, anything more than 3 years is really difficult for ship owners. So what we're seeing is as the fuel price goes up, Gulf of the volatility in the Gulf, as we have carbon taxes imposed, so the European Union has the European ETS, which now includes shipping, that pushes the price up and the return on investment is starting to come down and the cost of the systems is starting to come down. So when we reach around $600-700 per ton, that brings us into that 3 or 4 year return on investment period, which is just starting to happen about now. So again, that inflection point, that hockey stick increase maybe next year, we we could be seeing that if everything calms down in the Gulf and people are investing widely. At the moment, uncertainty, tends to temper investment. So we're hoping for a little bit more certainty and a little bit less risk in the market as well.
That is very interesting. So I understand from you that would more be on a governmental side to make sure that the costing side improves because they have through carbon taxes, etc. They have some there's a factor that they can change. But on the other
Sure.
side, I also understand that the contracts can be adjusted, they need to be adjusted, which is an industry task then, which would at the end
And
of the
so
day, if you think about it, and the costs are shared in a reasonable way, let me just say like that, then it would be a win-win for everyone. So these are the kind of main areas you're working on to improve and
absolutely.
create better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we don't call it a win-win situation. We call it a win-win-win situation.
Excellent. That I like that win-win-win situation. Let's aim at that. Um, we have to come to the end because we are aiming at a certain duration of this. This has been very, very exciting for me. I learned a lot, although I've already learned a lot from you, I must say. Maybe if people want to know more about your organization, about this wind propulsion, can you just spell the website so that people can go there and find more information?
Sure, yeah. So it's www.wind-ship.org.
Very simple. Wind-ship.org. Very good. Gavin, thank you so much for your time. this was very insightful. I'm sure that our audience will enjoy that. I would like to say thank you very much for the work that you're doing. It's really extremely important to cover this sector, which really needs that progress that you're working on.
Thank you, Stefan. And I'd just like to say that throughout the work that we've been doing over the last decade, I mean, the pioneers in the wind energy sector, like yourself and your members, have been true inspirations for us as well. So, we look at the trajectory and the fantastic work you guys are doing, and in a sense, we're in your slipstream. You're bringing us forward and showing us what is possible out there. So,
Yeah,
thank you
Gavin,
very much.
that's also very encouraging to hear because I often feel also that we are still rather at the beginning. But it's very good to hear, of course, when we compare that, then of course, mainstream wind turbines are, yeah, it's easy to understand what you say. So I think I look forward to continuing this collaboration that we have. And it's been great that we can use this opportunity of the podcast to share insights into the shipping industry, wind propulsion, that wind is not only for direct wind electricity generation, but also can be used in such a way. Thank you very much. With this, thanks to our audience, and goodbye for today.
Thanks very much, Stefan, and goodbye.